Hi, folks. I'm John Kraska with EveryLibrary. Thank you for being part of EveryLibrary Live Banned Books Week 2024 Festival. It's Sunday afternoon right now, and we're spending some time talking not only about book bans like we did this morning and some of the challenges that are facing libraries, but we're also trying to have a big conversation about the culture of reading, what the joy of writing. So many of the headlines right now about libraries are difficult headlines because of the kind of book banning that's going on around the country. In the home states of our guests coming up today, Wright Thompson and Michael Finkel, we have significant things going on with book bans and with censorship. And at the same time, the joy of being artists, the joy of being writers, the fun of reading interesting books. I'm very happy today to be able to bring in Wright Thompson and Mike Finkel for a conversation, guys. Hi, thanks for coming with us today.
You're welcome.
Yep. I'm happy to be here. Yep.
Absolutely. So Wright Thompson is the author of The Barn. It's a forthcoming book from Penguin Random House. Mike Finkel is the author of The Art Thief. Let me do the long bios, guys, and then what I'll do is keep you here, Mike, and then invite Wright to come back, if that's okay. So Mike Finkel is celebrated for his best-selling true crime narratives, including Stranger in the Woods and True Story. His latest book, The Art Thief. I'm looking forward to having this conversation, Mike. It's really interesting. It's an astonishing tale of Stefan Breitweiser, a master art thief who executed over 200 heists and amassed a collection worth an estimated $2 billion, all while never selling a single piece. It's a compelling narrative, Mike, and it reveals what is the darker side of beauty and possession. It offers readers an enthralling look at the criminal mind captivated by art. And then our other guest, who I'll dump off in a second, Wright Thompson, is the senior writer for ESPN and the author of Pappyland and The Cost of These Dreams. He brings us a profound and unsettling exploration of historical crime with his forthcoming work, The Barn. This book uncovers the harrowing truth behind the murders of Emmett Till, exposing the deep-seated racial injustices and long-standing cover-ups that have obscured the facts. Wright's investigation into the crime that shook America is a powerful reflection on racism, memory, and the struggle for truth. Wright, I'm looking forward to talking with you a little bit more in a few minutes. Thank you, Mike. Let's get into it. And it's interesting. I think that Penguin Random House put you guys together in suggesting this conversation, and I'm glad to be able to have it. The Art Thief. What is it about Stefan Breitweiser that kept you intrigued for over a decade? And how did your understanding of him evolve over the years? Interviews and research, and I mean, this is an interesting story for so many different reasons.
I guess, so many years. When I think about my writing process in one word or less, I would say it would be inefficient. I spent way too much time on this. But yeah, Breitweiser, I was living in France with my family in the south of France, and I read like a little newspaper article in a French newspaper about this man, Stefan Breitweiser, and three things popped out in a tiny article. One was the sheer number of thefts this guy stole from more than 200 museums. And then I really was interested in the way he stole, which was during the day, non-violently, sometimes with guards in the room. But really what I think catapulted this thought into obsession was why he stole. He stole them only to hang them in his house and admire it. And I think you mentioned, John, in your beautiful introduction, like $2 billion worth of art just to surround yourself with beauty. And I thought, wow, I would love to know more. This Stefan Breitweiser is barely known in the United States. He was born in 1971. We're not talking about ancient history. And so I wrote him a letter in my mediocre French, and we wrote letters back and forth. It's very old-fashioned, almost Shakespearean, for like 4 years before he finally agreed to meet me for lunch. And then I guess he was a little charmed by my terrible French and agreed to sit for, in fact, not just sit, we spent 40 or 50 hours together, not just doing interviews, but walking through museums. And I really got a visceral understanding of Breitweiser from the person himself. And then, of course, had to do all the research to see if, this shockingly, as someone who can steal 200 times might also lie to a journalist doesn't seem like that much of a stretch.
Well, in the book, you say that he was not really an art thief, or so he believes, even though he is perhaps the most successful and prolific art thief who has ever lived. He doesn't deny having stolen the pieces in his hidden rooms, most with the aid of a co-conspirator. He knows exactly what he has done. He can recount some of his crimes down to the precise number of steps it took him to sneak a work out of the museum exit. His issue is with other art thieves.
Yeah, so first of all, I was shocked by Breitweiser's memory. We went back to museums from which he stole. By the way, he's banned from most museums in Europe, so he had to wear this little disguise to go into museums, which is already like, journalistically fraught, but also fascinating. I'm wondering, as we're walking through museum and he's telling me point by point how to steal a work of art, I was, there's a little ticker tape playing in the back of my head, like, well, what am I going to do if the guy I'm trying to interview here steals something right in front of me? Am I going to have to call the police on my own subject? And luckily, I did not have to make that decision. And as you mentioned, he had Breitweiser didn't just steal by himself. He stole along with his girlfriend, who acted as his lookout. And because he was basically a full-time thief, this is a guy who averaged one art theft every 12 days for 7 years in the late 90s and early 2000s. And so basically, he was a full-time art thief living in the attic of his mother's house. And yes, one of the first things he says to me is, I really don't want to be called an art thief. And I said, why? And he's like, name an art thief. I said, at first I started, with the Ocean's 11 sort of, James Bond sort of things. And he's like, those are fictitious art thieves. Name them a real one. And the first thing that came to mind, like many of the listeners, might be like the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. And those guys were art thieves. They came into the museum, they attacked the night guards, and then they stuck a knife into a Rembrandt painting and sort of sliced it out of its frame, which to Breitweiser was the most horrible thing you could do. He was very careful with the works he stole. And then I'll leave you by saying, at the end, towards the end of our day's interview, I say, you don't want to be called an art thief. What would you like to be called, Stefan? And he says he would like to be called a collector with an unorthodox acquisition style.
There's a certain Parisian quality to that. It feels very much like we're smoking and having a demi of something or another while we're saying it.
During our apéro, yes, exactly.
Absolutely. Your other books, your other book, True Story, The Art Thief, you look very deeply into the psychology of your subjects. How do you find, are these empathetic characters or people to you? I mean, how do you balance that human side of these interviews with talking about people who've committed some real crimes?
Yeah, so for some reason, I get along really well with criminals. I'm not sure what that says about me. We'll put the psychological self-examination to the side.
Mm-hmm.
No, these are not empathetic individuals for the most part. I mean, first of all, a murderer, which is absolutely I don't think there's any goodness to be gleaned from a serial murderer. Then I read about a hermit who broke into people's houses. Really not a good idea. And then, of course, we're talking about an art thief now. And even though he may have done these crimes non-violently, he's basically stealing from every single one of us out here who are law-abiding citizens. And if we want to see a beautiful work of art, we go to a museum and see it. We don't take it home. I guess I would call it less empathetic than some sort of genuine curiosity about what drives someone to do this. And one of my rules of journalism, or one of my sort of guiding things, is if the person, him or herself, won't talk to me, then I'm really not interested in writing the story. I'm not a great reporter rounder. And so I feel like giving the subject a lot of power. I told Stefan Breitweiser in one of my early letters, if you'd like to talk to me, I'm going to write about you. Everything's going to be on the record. You're not going to get paid. You're not going to have any journalistic control. But if you decide not to talk to me, I'm actually not going to write this book. And I feel like empowering people that normally feel sort of put upon or have been literally locked in jail for a while gives them this, I guess, the sense of agency. And so I give Breitweiser the choice. That's why it took so long. We wrote letters. We had a lunch. We met actually in jail once. And then when he was released, and when he agreed to talk to me, we were sort of, all our cards were ready on the table. And I like to let people hang themselves, maybe, as opposed to me being the prosecutor. I'm more like the therapist. But I want to hear what you have to say, and before I start poking holes in it.
That's fascinating. So I know from your biography that you moved to the south of France. Was that for this book, or was that like incidental contact with the continent?
Yeah, so we moved to the south of France. It was mostly for my children to learn another language, and they speak much better French than me. But of course, I'm a very competitive man, and so I wanted to try and keep up with my kids, and so I'm studying French. And then I come across this story, and Breitweiser himself does not speak English, so we did all the interviews in French. And I thought, what a great way to, I was thinking the whole time I was studying French, John, that I should have been studying Spanish because that seems much more useful back here in the United States. And I was very happy to not just study French for no reason, but to actually, oh, now I want to talk to this person. And then again, I talked to the police inspectors and, did all the courtroom documents. So I felt like the biggest challenge, I know that Wright is going to have to talk about major challenges in his reporting, but not this one. The one for me was the fact that it all took place in another language. It sort of gives you, there's advantages in a funny sort of way and disadvantages. You can sort of, I have a little bit of a different personality in French. I don't think I wear as ugly as shirts when I'm speaking French. And no, but you can get away with asking sort of, I don't know how to, maybe purposely rude or impolite questions because you can play the faux naif. You could pretend that you don't understand the rules of the society and can get away with some things that I found actually weirdly. I didn't find speaking in another language limiting, but almost freeing in a way, but everything took twice as long because my head works a lot faster in English.
You mentioned before about not being the prosecutor and letting somebody speak for themselves. I think about the detective who just lets the subject talk. The Columbo kind of approach, we're all men of a certain age here. The Columbo, sort of approach, where just one more question. Those are very interesting journalistic styles. You've wanted to be a writer. Your biography says since you were 10 years old. Are you finding it to be that satisfying a career?
I mean, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, maybe yes. But today's a Sunday, so perhaps not. I mean, when someone says they maybe want to be a writer, I think the subtext is I'm not really good at anything else, or I'm curious about. I would like to. I think if someone asked me what job would you like to have, I'd say every job in the world for 2 weeks. And I feel that on some level, that's what a reporter does. I'm a little bit of a spoiled brat reporter, meaning that I don't have a specific subject. And I've moved from science to sports, adventure, conflict, crime, you name it. I've been able to write about it and just follow my curiosity. And so, let me just speak to you honestly, John. I really love being a journalist. I wish it was a little better remunerated, but such is life. I can't actually, 35 years into this job, I actually can't imagine doing anything else, and I'm completely unqualified to do anything else also.
I understand. I'm totally unemployable if it wasn't for spell check. So let me bring in our colleague Wright Thompson here, Mike. And you said there's a point of intersection here, a couple of points of intersection here. You talked about writing about sports and crime. You talked about the avocation of it. Mike, I'm going to put you in the background here for a minute and ask Wright a couple questions about what's up with him. But first, Wright, I want to bring people back to your book called The Barn. I could pull an excerpt, but sometimes I also like going to Goodreads and seeing what other humans who've read the book think. And while yours is forthcoming, it's hitting this week, in fact, and congratulations. There's a person on Goodreads who's already got an arc of it, an advanced reader copy, named Audrey. She said, The Barn is a riveting read about the location of Emmett Till's murder and its history within Mississippi. Written by a son of Mississippi, this unflinching account isn't just about one of Mississippi's sins and omissions. It seeks to unerase its own history, as well as the bravery, grief, and trauma that many Mississippians and expats still face. Wright Thompson is honest about his own complicity and seeks to rectify it. This is an important read as it seeks for truth and memory to be brought forward. Your personal connection to the Emmett Till story. I mean, I'm in suburban Chicago today. You're in Oxford, Mississippi today. But you're a native of Clarksville, Mississippi. Was the Emmett Till story part of your upbringing, or is it history that you had to discover?
It was not part of my upbringing whatsoever. And so, I mean, I don't think I'd ever heard his name until I left the state for college. The barn where he was killed, which I'd never heard of, and most people hadn't. It had been written out of the history quite intentionally to protect other murderers who were never brought to trial. The killers that we know of were protected by double jeopardy because they were acquitted. but there were other people involved who were protected. And so the barn is 23 miles from my family farm, didn't know anything about it. And, there are a lot of different descriptions of the book, but certainly one of them is this book is my investigation into how that could possibly be.
Hmm. Growing up in suburban Chicago, I'm in Berwyn, Illinois. Emmett Till was brought up from time to time, and much more recently, of course. But it was always brought up as a problem of the South, rather than also a relationship between Chicago and Mississippi, a relationship between the people that were involved on here in Chicago and back home there. There's a lot of ethical and moral challenges to writing a story like this, and it's a very painful chapter in American history. How do you, as a writer, brace yourself or embrace it even?
Well, I mean, I guess two things, and the second one will flow from the first one and dovetail in a way. There are probably 10 or 12 people alive who knew Emmett Till,
Hmm.
the actual person. Almost every one of them lives in suburban Chicago. I have met most of them. They've been dying since I started. And so, yes, this is a murder that happened to a country. I mean, it famously sparked the civil rights movement, but it's also a murder that happened to a family, and in many ways is still happening to the family, who are forever caught between their desire to not relive the pain and their sacred promise to Mamie to never let people forget her son and their cousin and their friend and their neighbor. And so, suburban Chicago, I mean, it's interesting. If Mississippi is where injustice was done and where he was killed, then in Chicago, and specifically in the Roberts Temple on the south side of Chicago, is where the resurrection happened. And so there is like deep biblical connections between these two places, just as they are connected by the Illinois Central Railroad, by their the Argo Summit. The folks who live there, who were overwhelmingly from the Mississippi Delta, call it Little Mississippi.
Mhm.
And I have since I work for ESPN, my sports hot take is that there is only one professional sports team in the state of Mississippi, and it is the Chicago White Sox on the south side of Chicago. So all of that is to say, I mean, there are people who are living with this. There are family members who relive it daily. Wheeler Parker is a living eyewitness. It wasn't that much for me to shoulder in comparison, and I start rolling my eyes when people start talking about the trauma of writing a book, because if there's a trauma of writing about it, that means the people living it are dealing with actual, real, existential, unrelenting trauma. And I get to tell their story, but also I get to duck back out again. So, that's my experience.
Right. I understand what you're saying in a certain respect. We spend a lot of time here at EveryLibrary working on crisis situations for libraries, censorship, book bans. We've had librarians who have been under the thumb of some really onerous attacks, being called horrible names, and really, I mean, some of them on the receiving end of death threats. I mean, it's not the same as the civil rights movement, the pre-civil rights era. It's certainly not the Jim Crow South, but there are echoes of it. And one thing that I have from it, when we help them out in different ways, is some remove, and I respect that.
And like in terms of banning books, and it only helps an author for your book to be banned, but for a librarian who's
Mhm.
trying to tell the truth to little kids, who's trying to get them James and the Giant Peach and the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which I'm currently reading to my 6-year-old. I mean,
Mhm.
these are the people on the front lines, and you know uh like, it is interesting how these asshole politicians are always threatening librarians, and they're not coming at me or Penguin Random House, because we have lawyers and an enormously sophisticated public relations machine.
Mhm.
That's what I would say to that little Napoleon dude down in Florida. I can't even think of DeSantis.
Well,
He said, but like these cats, like, like they're just little Napoleon loser wimps, and like
Mhm.
the surest sign of a weak soul and the surest sign of a coward and an insecure little child is wanting to censor someone else's idea. Because if you really believed in your opinions and you really believed that you were doing the right thing for the people of the state of Mississippi or the people of the state of Florida or the people of the United States of America, then you wouldn't need to threaten anyone at all because you wouldn't be threatened. So the banning of the books is the tell that they are morally bankrupt and cowards.
One of the things that we know really clearly, and earlier this morning we heard from Emily Knox, who's been writing some powerful scholarship on book bans as erasure. It's always been easier in this country to go after a book than it is to go after a person or a people. You can use the book ban as a proxy fight against Black and brown people, against LGBTQ folks. You can use those book ban attempts to criminalize, not just marginalize, but criminalize by saying that their life is obscene in some way, shape, or form.
And that it is banning of books is always the sign of a dying star. So, like, yes, it is an attempt to marginalize and erase. I mean, erase this. My whole book really is about the fight between the existential fight between memory and erasure. And so, I completely align with the idea that banning books is an effort to erase. I mean, the thing we have to remember is that the fact that anyone wants to do it is proof they've already lost.
Right. Let me bring in Mike here too, because you guys have got some good intersection points here. A lot of what you're talking about in both of your books is how do we look at memory? How do we be honest to memory? What happens when memories are interpreted? And there's that overlay of obsession that says, here's how we believe we should be looked at on the art thief's part. There's the truth telling that's so important, but who listens? When it comes to the work that was being written about in the barn, or the lives that were being written about in the barn. I mean, the idea of erasure, the idea that society is willing to turn a blind eye. Right? I think you're making a hell of a point here.
Well, not just willing to. It is the only way that dying cultures can perpetuate themselves is by trying to erase. It isn't an accidental byproduct. I mean, it is, it's one of the things you look for. When you want to know the canary in the mine shaft that lets you know that something is ending. When people become obsessed with stopping other people from learning things, I mean, it's exhibit A.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. I loved everything that you had to say. In fact, I've been obsessively devouring your book this weekend. And I have to say that I agree with what you said and all the power in which you said it. But what strikes me so much about The Barn is the poetry in which you wrote it. It doesn't come off as a polemic. It comes off with this beautiful voice that just grabbed me. And the way you've been able to combine insane amount of research, a personal story, and your point of view without the reader feeling pummeled or pulled on, actually rather sort of cradled in beautiful language, I have to say is really just been stunning. I've been reading it all weekend obsessively.
Well, that's really kind of you. And I mean, because it isn't a polemic, it's a prayer. And it isn't
praise. Exactly my point indeed.
and it is, not to get into how the sausage is made, but it is first and foremost a story that I want to tell you, that hopefully at the end of the way you see yourself and the way you see both a part of the country that might be very familiar to you or very foreign, but more important, the way you see your own home and think about the myths that are told there. I mean, the thing that this book did that really has messed me up is because the main character is essentially a barn. Mississippi, and by the way, I've driven to Chicago and I've ridden the train up there over and over. And so America is covered in barns, abandoned, still used, real close to the road, out in the distance. And I cannot look at a barn now without wondering, I wonder what happened in there we don't know about. And so, there's what's the great is I think it's Malcolm X, everywhere south of Canada is Mississippi, or everywhere south of Canada is the South. I mean, I hope that whoever reads it, whether you live in suburban Chicago or if you're in Deer Valley, Utah, or if you're wherever you are, I hope that you start to think about the postage stamp of dirt, your own Yoknapatawpha. I mean, whatever the postage stamp of dirt around you is, and to start trying to interrogate that. So anyway, I really appreciate that, Mike. That's really kind.
And when you were talking, I was thinking even more metaphorically, not just literal barns. We all sort of have a little, every family, every person has their own little metaphorical barn, little spot where there are things that happen that maybe we would rather not open the door to. And then John, I was thinking, how the heck are you going to compare these two books? But then I was also thinking, just like Breitweiser had his secret attic where he put his ill-gotten gains, like maybe on some level, the two books sort of touch on this, like, part of memory or family or responsibility that we all would rather not see, but it makes you more human, more educated to open up your physical or metaphorical barn and take a look inside.
And you can't love a place unless part of you also hates it. And you can't love a piece of art that you have deprived other people of without it being deeply complex. And like, I bet that he would hold. I started calling him Mr. Budweiser in my head, and I know that's wrong. And that should look. It was Labor Day; lots of them were consumed. But like, I bet he would pass a lie detector test that he loves art, right? And that he loves these paintings, and that he is the person who is best suited to protect them, not some sort of corporate adjacent money machine that is monetizing other people's great works of art. But he's also the guy that pulls them out of the eyes of school kids and pulls them out of the eyes of whoever the next painter might be. And so it's interesting that I've always thought the most interesting narrative spaces are in between the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and then the stories other people tell about us, because my own most narcissistic vision of myself is not true, but the cultural critic who dislikes me the most, their view isn't true either. And so it's in the conversation, whether it is with an art thief or whether it's the people who made sacred promises to a mother to not let the world forget their children. I mean, it feels like a lot of what he and I are doing, and a lot of what you've been talking about this week and leading up to today, John, is the intersection of memory, identity, obsession, self-awareness, and at the Venn diagram of those are those rare books that go wide and deep. And so I don't know. I mean, I do understand now why the Penguin Random House people saw this more clearly than we did, because there are real obvious intersections once Mike mentions them.
I mean, beautiful words, right? I'm literally as we're having this conversation, figuring out all these connections. Whereas we're I guess that's a sign of a good conversation. Thanks, John. I hope the listeners are getting something out of it, because I feel like I'm getting something out of this. And right, it was just with what you just said about people's vision of themselves and other people's visions of them. Like, you said, oh, the art thief would probably pass a lie detector test, sort of like someone who abuses their wife would prove that I just love her. It's that same sort of idea, the self-delusion and the reality, and where they intersect, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, self-delusion and reality, that's the whole game. I mean, I'm doing a story right now for ESPN that when I get off of this, I'm going to go back to writing, and that's all we're doing. Like that's it. That's the whole thing, is obsession, and how obsession ends up crowding out self-awareness.
I do think it's interesting that your intersection points. I'm going to put your information back up here too, Mike. Your intersection points around sports, and I'm not much of a sports guy, but I can tell you that my father-in-law was one of those Chicago White Sox fans you talked about, right? Best year of his life was 2005, when the Chicago White Sox went to the World Series, and his first grandchild was born in that order. You know, like this is it. Can you guys just talk? Let's wrap it up with this. If I was to be an aspiring writer about sports, you know, the story, that liminal point that you described, right, about where is it in between our own self-image and how people see us, that point of obsession, Mike, where if you're going to do that, you know, 10,000 passes, you're going to do 10,000 runs, and, you know, 10,000 plays in order to be good at it. What's your advice, guys, to the writer out there who wants to maybe start with sports, maybe lives in that sports space? But what's your advice individually to writers who can get in touch with that truth?
Well, I mean, since I'm the sports writer on the call, I'll start, and then Mike, you can have the last word. Uh, I would say that there are 1,000 different ways to write about sports, and the mistake that most people make, because look, we hire people all the time, and I see people coming to ESPN, and I see some of them make it, and I see some of them not, and their talent has almost nothing to do, in hindsight, with sorting those people into the buckets of making it and not making it. I would say that, I mean, to thine own self be true. I mean, that whatever the thing you're obsessed with, whatever the questions you're trying to ask yourself about the world, about your home, about yourself, about other people, about the systems that drive the world, about forces, about people, about power, about race, about money, about statistics, about home, about tribalism, whatever it is. I think you need to explore the questions that are essential to you as a human being, selfishly, and explore them through stories that allow you a greater understanding of the worlds that you want to know, with the sort of Rick Rubin idea that any great art necessarily divides the audience, and that if you're trying to make something that everybody likes, you're not making anything that's worth a shit. And so make something that you like, and do it. If you want to be the next Bill Simmons, go be the next Bill Simmons. If you want to be the next Gary Smith, go be the next Gary Smith. If you want to do deep dives on analytics, and and that's what you want to do, instead of going to Wall Street just to annoy your parents, do that. But there is no right or wrong way. The only wrong way is a way that isn't authentic to you and the things you really care about, and the questions that, to quote the late great Mr. Buffett, bother your soul.
I love it. Mike, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, right, beautiful, beautiful words, is that, you know, for anybody who's listening, what if you want to be great at something, whether it's writing or sports or anything in the world? There's the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours, but the one thing that struck me is that I would love to take full credit for my own work, but really, what you can't see invisibly behind me are all the editors and all the people, like the teachers, that have helped me. I believe that if you drill down to almost any great athlete, they'll also be a great coach, a great someone that gave you tips. I'm telling you, my first draft of The Art Thief was just plain old terrible, and I had my 10 readers tell me, Mike, this thing sucks, and here's how you're going to rewrite it. And I wanted to cry, but I really actually was more grateful that someone saved me from myself. 35 years of writing, you think I know how to write something? Not. It's still, you have that beginner mindset. Just the only thing I would add, just be open. I think this even attracts back to how we believe ourselves and how other people, be open to how other people see you. And I think the sign of someone really good is someone who takes that critique and changes, or takes it to heart and makes the improvements. And that's how you get good. I think you're the sports guy, but like, wasn't it always like Michael Jordan's the one who came to practice first and worked the hardest? It's usually the best people that don't just skate by. They're working the hardest and listening. I
think we've all found long ago that Zen is just a butt in a seat. Like just do it. And like this isn't rocket science. It's just, I wrote 1,000 words a day for 290 days, and then cut 150% of it. I'm sure you did that too. I mean, there's bound to be a more efficient way, but I mean, I think you're right. I mean, if you want to write about sports, you need good coaches, or any kind of obsession, frankly. Christine has sent me your book. I'm staring at it right now, so now I feel very guilty. It is on that stack right there.
I understood, of course.
But it also, I've read a little, and it makes me it makes me want to go steal paintings. I know that's not what you want, but like the dude sort of seems badass.
You know, you guys should probably keep to baseball cards there, right?
Awesome.
It's all good. Right. As soon as you mentioned the 6-year-old, the only thing that went through my head is that guy does not have any time to free read.
No.
I haven't read a book for fun in a really long time.
I understand. Kids are big. Kids take up a lot of space.
It's great.
Well, gentlemen, I'm glad that I could help you guys meet cute today. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And thank you for being part of the EveryLibrary Live Ben Books Week Fest this year. It's an important time for us at EveryLibrary to be talking to people again about the culture of reading, the joy of writing. The reason that we get into print, is because, it's almost like a Robin Williams quote from Dead Poets Society. It changes you, when you get a chance to engage, like you guys have been writing, and us as readers. I want to invite people to be part of what we're doing today, this whole week at EveryLibrary. We are fundraising in order to support our work and do things like oppose censorship, oppose discrimination that are affecting libraries, and help support the future of libraries too. Again, Wright Thompson, author of The Barn, Michael Finkel, author of The Art Thief, Penguin Random House. Thank you both so much today for this opportunity. It's a real joy to be with you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, guys.
Very good.
Bye.